Chapter 26. Ouch. Except when non-members were present, survivors' services were always single-sex affairs. James and Rat were taken into a large hall and made to lie face down on the wooden floor at the centre of the two circles, which contained all the girls in the boarding school. James didn't know what to expect, but it was reassuring having Rat alongside him, because the smaller boy had been through this before and didn't look too scared. The service was taken by Georgie, whose instruments of choice were a harmonica and a twangy steel guitar. After the standard 15 minutes of clapping, singing and chanting, Georgie's voice took on a sombre tone. The ark is a place of godly purity, but to sin within the ark is to invite devils into the holiest place on earth. Before we can forgive, such sin must be severely punished. The devil must be beaten from the souls of the miscreants. Georgie gleefully slipped a wooden paddle out of her shorts and snapped her fingers. Two girls carried a school desk into the centre of the circles. James caught an awkward glance at Lauren as he was made to stand up. A padded belt that fastened with Velcro was wrapped around James's waist to protect the base of his spine from injury. Then the back of his shorts were tugged down, exposing his bum. A plastic bit was placed in the boys' mouths to stop them biting their tongues, and they were made to lean over the table. It is the duty of those whose dignity was undermined by these perverted and lustful boys to step forward and offer punishment, Georgie said, bouncing on the balls of her bare feet. James was alarmed as a dozen blue-socked girls stood up and formed a queue. There had only been 7 or 8 in the shower, but James was in no position to complain with a chunk of rubber jammed in his mouth. The older boy is new to this ark. 1 stroke each, Georgie said. Rathbone is a persistent menace. Give him 3. Commence! James had his head dangling over the edge of the table, so he could only see an upside-down view of the girls' trainers through the underside of the table. The first one stepped up and took the small paddle from Georgie. There was a sharp crack, and the table rocked forwards onto its front legs as Rat took his first lick. By the time he'd taken 3, James could see tears in the corner of Rat's eyes. I forgive you, Rathbone, the blue-socked girl said as she stepped across to James. James quaked with fear as he braced for the first lick. The force of the paddle made him jolt violently, but it hurt less than he'd feared. I forgive you, James, the girl said tautly, as she stepped back and handed the paddle down the line. James's relief didn't last long. The second hit hurt more than the first, and each one after that grew more painful. After the 13th girl took the final swing at James's bare buttocks, Georgie hauled him off the table and snatched the bit from his mouth. As the girls filed out of the room to start morning lessons, James ripped off the padded belt and hitched up his shorts. He noticed that the wooden paddle on the ground beside him was spattered with blood, but James felt his bum and found nothing but 1 slightly bloody graze. Then he stepped back and looked at Rat. The 11-year-old had taken 39 paddle strokes. He was struggling to find the strength to pull himself off the table and had streaks of blood trickling down his legs. Stand up then, lad, Georgie said, sounding extremely pleased with herself. We'll beat the devils out of you yet, young Rathbone. Rat used the table to push himself up, and James grabbed his arm to steady him. He wiped tears off his face and scowled defiantly at Georgie. Didn't hurt a bit, he said. Georgie ignored him and stepped across to eyeball James. So, new boy, she said, as she picked up the bloody paddle and waved it in James's face. That was a taste of what you can expect if you tempt devils into the ark. I will demand absolute obedience from now on. Is that clear? Yes, miss, James said, hardly able to conceal his sense of outrage. A further glance at Rat's bloody legs gave James an urge to pick up the paddle and give Georgie a taste of her own medicine. He had the strength, but he'd known there was a risk of physical punishment when he'd signed up for the mission, and he wasn't going to blow 6 weeks of work in one crazy outburst. Right, Georgie said, twisting her face into an evil smirk. Let's have the pair of you off to the sweat box. James guessed that something called a sweat box wasn't going to be an air-conditioned space filled with fluffy cushions. And he was spot on. Georgie frog-marched the 2 boys to a metal shed near the ark's concrete perimeter. The inside was 3 paces across, with a sand floor and 2 buckets. The one containing drinking water had a plastic beaker bobbing in it, while the other served as an emergency toilet. James and Rat reluctantly stepped inside. There was no window, but the brilliant sunlight escaping through gaps in the metal was enough to see by. Contemplate your sins, Georgie said severely. The metal door clattered shut before it was secured with 2 sliding bolts. James panicked as the searingly hot air reached into his lungs. Rat saw James was struggling and spoke firmly. Calm down. I can't breathe. Take little breaths until your lungs adjust to the heat, Rat said, as he rubbed James's shoulder to reassure him. You'll be okay. Just don't get too close to the metal. It'll fry your skin. While James steadily took deeper breaths, Rat used his shoe to turn over the baking sand so that part of the floor was cool enough to sit on. How long are we in here for? James asked. Until school ends at 1. That's 5 hours, James gasped. James copied Rat, turning over the baking dirt before lying on his side so that his throbbing bum didn't touch the floor. He remembered the tortures he'd been through in basic training and began thinking of the slogans they chanted. This is tough, but cherubs are tougher. This is tough, but cherubs are tougher. He smiled at the irony as he realised that this was part of Cherub's own brand of thought control. But the similarities between the tough regime on Cherub campus and life inside the Survivor's Ark were only skin deep. Everyone who joined Cherub knew what they were signing up for, and if you wanted to leave, it was as simple as asking. Within a few minutes, James had got his breathing back to normal, and he'd rehydrated himself from the morning run with 3 beakers of water. You know, Rat said, speaking slowly because of the heat. This is all my fault. I reckon I owe you a favour. Anything you like? James smirked. What exactly does a kid with a sore butt and attitude problems have to offer me? More than you think, Rat said indignantly. Being one of Regan's kids counts for quite a bit, and feeding gossip into the right ears can earn you plenty of favours around here. James tried thinking of something that would be good for the mission, without making his goals seem obvious. Okay, Mr. Big Shot, James said. I take it we get work assignments here? The same as in Brisbane? Sure. School lasts until 1, then we work until dinner. Could you fix me and my little sister up with something cushy? Like a nice desk job instead of cleaning toilets or laundry? No sweat, Rat said, surprising James with his air of confidence. I'll have a word with my stepmom, Susie. That's my dad's 4th wife. She's the second most powerful person in the Ark, after the spider. What about your mum? James asked. Rat made a gesture like there was a noose around his neck, followed by a gagging sound. My mum couldn't handle all the other women my dad was carrying on with. She ended up going gaga and hanging herself. Christ! James gasped. Oh, I'm sorry. Not as sorry as me, Rat said. You've got a family outside of this nut house. If you're enough of a pain in the ass, they'll kick you out to go and live with your dad or something. I'm stuck here till I'm 18. Doesn't your dad care what's happening to you? He's 82 years old. He needs an oxygen cylinder to breathe. He's got 33 kids, and I remind him of the nutty wife who topped herself. Bummer, James said. It was cool back when my mum was alive. We'd visit other communes all over the world with my dad. I was like 5 or 6, and everywhere we went, we were treated like royalty. Cameras flashed when we arrived at airports. I remember one commune in Japan. I wanted to be normal and play, but none of the other kids would go near me because they were scared of who I was. They'd hand me toys, do a little bow, and then scarper. Quite a fall from grace, James said. More like a plummet. Now I'm just in the way. I'm not a survivor, and I'm too smart to buy their brain games. But there's nowhere else I can go.